Hey guys, what's up? Welcome back to Tom Spark Reviews. Today we're doing something a little bit different. We're diving into some of the best fantasy audiobooks with amazing narrators. Now, you might not know this about me, but I'm actually a huge audiobook addict. I've listened to a ton of audiobooks in the last few years and found them the perfect distraction for any chore or mundane activity. Doing the dishes, walking the dog, or even driving can be made fun with audiobooks. Now, that sounds a bit cliche, but as someone who loves fantasy and loves reading, but often can't really find the time to do it, audiobooks are their perfect way to keep reading up as a hobby. If you haven't signed up to Audible yet, consider clicking on the link down below. If you click on this link, you could start Audible and get 2 books free. It's one of the most affordable ways to download audiobooks since it only starts out around $15 a month, and each month you get a credit to buy a book instead of paying the full price of $30 to $45. So I've been using Audible for a long time. It's one of the best services, and it's really consumer friendly because anytime you don't like a book, you could just return it and check out a new one. So they let you pretty much return anything, granted that you don't listen to much of it or you don't like it. And it's just really consumer friendly, like Amazon is, of course, and it's just a great service. Anyways, guys, let's go ahead and talk about my favorite fantasy audiobooks with amazing narrators. So first up, guys, is going to be the Mistborn series. Now, the Mistborn series is perhaps one of the most well-known series on this list. If you haven't read the series yet or given it a fair shot, I really encourage you to do so. The series has 6 books in it, and each and every one of them are excellent. Each book is narrated by Michael Kramer, who, quite frankly, is a legend in the audiobook space. He's narrated some other big series like Wheel of Time and other series. He has a deep, gravelly voice, and he has a great inflections for different characters, and variation in his voice makes it very easy to understand who's talking.
He seemed pleased, which was a good thing. The Ska weren't actually Tresting's property. Like all Ska, they belonged to the Lord Ruler.
The storyline for the Mistborn series gets quite complex and the world is very diverse, but the main storyline itself starts out fairly simple and gets more complicated in the later books. In the first book, it's really just about a rebel girl overtaking a dictator. The young girl develops special magical abilities and learns how to use them with her friends and mentors. That may sound cliche, but the genius in these books comes from the magic systems, the world building, and of course, the characters themselves. Sanderson is well known for making great characters, and he became known for it, quite frankly, for these books. In some other books like The Way of Kings, which are now quite large, some characters suck and some are awesome. But in the Mistborn series, I found that nearly every character itself is interesting and well crafted. Sanderson's plotting and narrative tension can often feel stretched out, as in most of his books, but in the Mistborn series, you will fall in love with the characters because they are often flawed and developed with excruciatingly slow build-up and attention to detail, which makes them feel very fleshed out. The characters don't always make the best decisions, and the world you become part of feels real, since there is consequence to characters' actions and a real sense of greatness in the world that they live in. The last 3 books in this series have a shift of tone to be more funny and based on Western tropes, but the action is just as good, and some of the characters are so funny and so well voiced by Kramer that you might find yourself laughing out loud. If you want 6 books to leave yourself in for a few months or a year, this is a great series. This is actually my first series that made me really get into audiobooks and finish the series itself, so it has a special place in my heart. The Red Rising series by Pierce Brown could very well be the next popularized Game of Thrones. It's only a matter of time, I think, before it becomes a TV show or a hit movie. Now, it is a newish series, but it has a good cult following already and has rave reviews on every platform. However, I was surprised I didn't know about it before just a while ago. Now, it's not fantasy per se, as it is based more in science fiction, but it does have a lot of fantasy elements like sword fighting and even narrative arcs similar to the Hunger Games. The first book especially. Plus, it's so good I just had to stick it in here. The series is voiced by Tim Gerald Reynolds, and I think this is his best narration yet, hands down. The sense of rage and passion from the main character in this book really comes through his voice, and he even goes so far to sing small poems and songs in the book that really draw you in, and they almost feel haunting.
Little Io took the Hemanthus into father's left work boot and ran back to her own father's side. My sister, Liana, murmured a lament.
The character in this book, particularly the main one, is one of my favorite characters ever. Think a mixture of Ender from Ender's Game, mixed with Spartacus. The plot focuses solely around the main character who wants to get revenge for the wrongs the dominant social class have done to him. In this, the book paints a really interesting portrayal of social hierarchy and race. But the classes and hierarchies in this book are really interesting, and it's easily a book-sized series you could quickly burn through. There are the Reds, who are the worker class, the Golds, who are the leaders, and the other races and other classes you'll have to discover yourself. It's a fascinating idea and an interesting world with cool weapons, lots of action and fighting, and like Sanderson's works, there are a lot of mistakes and consequences that the characters have to struggle through that make them interesting and relatable. This series is also full of twists and turns and is hardly ever predictable. Overall, this is no doubt one of my favorite series ever. The first 2 books are amazing and probably 10 out of 10, but the later books lose some narrative steam, and the later part of the second series, new narrators come in who aren't as good as Reynolds, but they are still worth listening to finish up, the story of the main character. The First Law trilogy by Joe Abercrombie is another legendary series that is voiced by the amazing Stephen Pacey. Bar none, I think that Stephen Pacey is probably the best narrator of all time. When he does voices in this book particularly, it's almost like there's various narrators in time.
And purple stains all up his ribs. Tender to the touch and no mistake, but it didn't feel like anything was broken.
The amazing narration is complemented perfectly by some of the most diverse and interesting characters the fantasy world has ever seen. This may sound like overly high praise, but once you see Logan Ninefingers go into berserk mode, I guarantee you will split a grin and giggle like a schoolgirl just like I did. The book is full of characters like these, and while some of them are more interesting than others, Abercrombie keeps the plot moving forward with each character's personal desires and goals. The story is all about characters trying to hide from their past and move forward, and their inability to do so. One thing that Abercrombie does well, perhaps better than anybody else, is make each character stand out alone in their own individual story arc, and then as the book progresses, the characters eventually meet and see each other. When this happens, the pages and words in your ears really do come alive as you marvel how the characters interact and converse with each other. Think the Avengers meeting the first time, or when Rey finally got to meet Luke in the last Star Wars movie. Having fully fleshed out characters finally meet each other and converge is a fascinating narrative tool, and one that I never got tired of in these books. Abercrombie's dialogue is made for audiobooks, and it's some of the best in the business. The entire First Law trilogy and any book by Abercrombie, quite frankly, is stellar. Some of the young adult books that he makes aren't quite as good in my opinion, and the first 3 books of the First Law trilogy are insanely good, while the other ones after the next 3 after that are more like epilogue type books, but there is a new series coming out which could be very cool in the future. Now, the Blackwinged series isn't something I've heard about as much, but it is still very good. The Blackwinged series is a grimdark steampunk story by Ed McDonald, narrated by Colin Mace. It's all about a captain who is trying to save the world from an enemy called the Deep Kings. The fundamental element of this series is to make a mythos of power and wizards and sorcerers who are basically gods. The series has a strong cast of characters, but what really stands out is the world building. In the world, there is a place called the Misery, and it's sort of a toxic nuclear wasteland where weird and interesting but mostly dangerous creatures thrive. The series has an excellent narrator, Colin Mace, whose gritty and deep voice perfectly matches that of the main character, Captain Galharo.
Even through my hands, the detonation was deafening. The rush of air bowled into me all the way up on the battlements, set me staggering.
He also is capable of doing women and children voices very well as well, which is not easy to do and isn't seen by that many narrators. While the characters aren't as interesting or as compelling as the First Law series, or the magic system as well designed as in Mistborn, and it doesn't have the same narrative tension and page-turning nature as Red Rising, the series has a solid foundation in each element, and there are enough twists and turns to make you want to invest into each book of the series. The strong narration and strong world building make the series very compelling for fans of dark, apocalyptic, steampunk fantasy. The Powder Mage series by Brian McKellen is another steampunk fantasy series that is extremely solid and well narrated. Christian Rodska is the quintessential old British man who I love to narrate all my stories.
Adamant listened for the soft footfalls of patrolling heelmen.
My favorite thing about this series is the interesting magic system. There are powder mages who could snort powder and shoot bullets and manipulate kind of guns and powder. On the flip side, there are also other sorcerers called Privilege who can wield more traditional type of magic. The plot arc deals a lot in politics and the war going on between nations, and eventually gods and other beings of power are drawn into the conflict. The characters in these series are extremely strong and multi-layered, and there's a lot of conflict and consequences to actions. While in a lot of novels there are really only one or two main characters that drive the main plotline that you're interested in, the Powder Mage series excels by making 3 or 4 or even 5 characters at times, as well as their plot arcs, very well paced and interesting and not distracting from the overall narrative. Later books in the series focus more on other characters and new characters alike, but the fleshed out world and political intrigue here in the Powder Mage series has always been very strong, and if you like kind of more of a tactical military kind of approach to some chapters, this is an excellent series. Alright guys, thanks for checking out this video, and remember, click down below and click on my link to go to Audible and get 2 free books. It'll help support the channel, and if you really like this video, let me know down in the comments down below. I don't really do kind of book review or top book review lists like this video. Usually I do videos about VPN or reviewing software, but if you really like this, let me know down in the comments down below, and I'll see you again very soon.